Welcome back. What's going on, guys? Today we're going to talk about common cyber security attacks and defense strategies. So I have listed here common cyber security attacks. Of course, this is not a thorough list. It actually contains only the common attacks, the attacks that we frequently see on the internet. And I have listed here the common and most effective security measures that can be used to prevent these attacks. Additionally, in order to understand these attacks and defense strategies, we will also do some simulation. The simulation actually uses a room in TryHackMe called Common Attacks. We will cover phishing simulation, passwords and authentication simulation, and lastly, the public network safety part. So let's get started. The first one is social engineering, and most of you know what is social engineering actually. It's the art of hacking human minds and tricking people into doing something they don't want to do. Social engineering can be first physical. Okay, so we actually aim to perform social engineering by performing physical attack, or it could be psychological. Okay. Psycho, I'm gonna call it psycho. So basically, example of physical attacks is the USB attacks. So what happens in the USB attacks is someone could go into some area, drop some USB keys in the hopes that someone would pick up the USB keys and insert them into their device. Once the USB key is inserted into the computer device, the attacker will be able to control the device. That's an example of USB physical attacks, and most of you actually saw that in the Mr. Robot, where actually Darlene walked into a police station. She dropped the USB keys and then she walked away. One of the cops picked up one of the USB keys. They plugged the USB keys in their computers and boom, they had access. That's one example of USB social engineering attacks that use the physical factor. We have next the psychological attacks. In the psychological attacks, we have many examples. The most common example is the pretexting. So pretexting is when someone impersonates the identity of someone else. An example would be you walk into a company and you pose as an IT support of an IT provider in order to access computer systems. That's an example of pretexting. Another example of pretexting is called the, not pretexting, sorry. Another example of the psychological factor is the reverse engineering. Yes, reverse engineering also exists in social engineering. So this example is laid out very clearly in a book called the Kevin Metnick book, The Art of Defense, The Art of Deception. So you can see a very clear example of what is reverse engineering from the perspective of social engineering in the book called, I'm gonna put it here, so Art of Deception. You can look up this book, okay, and download it to understand what is reverse engineering in social engineering. But in a nutshell, reverse engineering is that when you break something, break a computer system, break anything that belongs to anyone, and then you offer to fix it. Once you fix it, or once you are approved to fix the device, you will be able to do whatever you want. So that's for social engineering. Now, what could be an effective measure to prevent social engineering? Actually, the only effective measure to prevent social engineering is, you guess it, it's security awareness. Educating the employees, educating yourself about the latest security, the latest social engineering attacks, and what are the various methods used by attackers to hack humans is the most effective method to prevent social engineering attacks. So that is the first one. Now, what is an example of social engineering attack used commonly is the phishing attacks, phishing emails. Phishing emails come in various forms, and we will also now take a simulation here from the TryHackMe room to demonstrate the phishing emails. Okay, so let's take a look now at one example phishing email. In the simulation here, we take a look at the email, and if it is safe, we're going to click on the safe one. If it is phishing, we're going to click on phishing email. So The email here claiming to come from Google support, and this is the email support@google.com. Fine, this is fine. Let's take a look at the message. Hello, it has come to our attention that your account may have been accessed by a third party. Please log in and change your password. So this is actually a legitimate message that comes from Google if someone changed your password, or if you changed your password from a different location. That's totally legitimate. But why this email actually is a phishing email? There are many factors to look for, or many indicators to look for, to decide whether an email is considered as a phishing email or not. One of the indicators is actually the links, right? So this link, if you read the link, myaccount.google.com, this is a legitimate link, right? But when you hover over the link, the real link appears, as you can see down here on the very left. If I hover over again, you will see the link down here above the hash cracking phishing. The link will appear here. I'm going to hover over it again so you see the link. So as you can see, the link here, down here, saying myaccount.googlesupport.com. It's very different from the link written in the message. And now the question is, which one is the real one? The real one is the link that is appearing on the very far left, down here. That's the actual link. That's where the link is going. The link here is actually we can say it's a hyperlink. It's a hyperlink written by the person to convince you that this link actually goes to Google. So that's why this email is a phishing email. The link is not a pointer to an actual Google URL. So I'm gonna type here, I'm gonna click on phishing email. So you're right, this was a phishing email. Click on the show issues button below to see the reasons why. So the link actually, this is the answer, the link actually goes to a different website than advertised. Next. Let's take a look now at the next scenario. The next scenario here, we have an email coming from, claiming, let's say, coming from accounts at thebankinggroup.thm. That's the email address of the sender, right? And the message is asking to download an attachment. And attachments, or emails containing attachments, are a very popular way to hack corporates and install malware. So what do we do here? If you hover over the click here, the original domain will appear here, down here, the original URL. Let's read through the URL. bankinggroup.sharedhosting.thm/downloads/finance. It's Excel file. So that's the real domain. Okay, if we compare the real URL here to the domain of the sender account, the bankinggroup.thm, right? So it's actually, they actually share the same name, the banking group, but the domain here is different from the domain that appears once we hover over the attachment link. The real domain bankinggroup.sharedhosting, so that's the actual URL of the attachment, very different from this one, which means that the sender has spoofed the original domain name to convince you that this email has come from the banking group, right? So this is an example of phishing and spoofing. So I'm gonna hover over, I'm gonna go ahead and click on phishing email. So the answer is, you're right, this was a phishing email. Show issues. There is a misspelling in the domain name of the sender. It only contains 1G instead of 2. Exactly, that's also one of the reasons. Next, the domain name of the linked file looks suspicious. So there were 2 reasons. Next one. Email coming from TryHackMe, no reply at TryHackMeSupport.thm. Hello, we haven't seen you for a while. Click here to keep on hacking. Okay, so we have a hyperlink here. If you hover over the hyperlink, it is pointing to tryhackme.com. So tryhackme.com is a legitimate website. It actually matches the sender email. The sender email is coming from TryHackMeSupport.thm, which is also a legitimate domain. So let's assume that the email has been spoofed, right? So someone has spoofed the no reply email of TryHackMe. Let's assume that. But if we compare, or if we take a look at the click here is pointing to the real domain. right? So there is no any claim to download an attachment or to send you to a malicious domain. So here we're going to assume the email to be safe. So this is the correct answer. Next, here we have another one, which with an attachment coming from test accounts at ACME IT support.thm. Hello, I have attached the report for you asked for. Please do not show this to anyone. So this is actually an image. You can't download the attachment. It's only for the simulation. But this email contains a PDF attachment. And there is no way to identify the URL, right? There is no hover over click. There is no hyperlink. There is only an attachment. So what to do in this case? The only way to decide whether to download the PDF or not is to look at the sender email. If you identify or if you recognize the sender email, go ahead and download it. But if you don't recognize that, just don't download the attachment. I mean, don't download the attachments from sources you don't trust or sources you don't recognize. So here you're gonna go ahead and click on phishing. Show issues. Don't trust PDF file attachments that are not from a trusted source or unexpected, as they could contain malware. So that was the phishing simulation. All right, let's go back to the board now. Now we demonstrated now an example of social engineering, very common example, the phishing emails. In the next attack we have is the malware attacks. So malware attacks are very common. Malware attacks come in various forms. The attackers may send a PDF file, right? They can send a PS1 file, PowerShell file. They can send exe files, right? They can send Python as well, or Excel files, Word files, you name it. So all of these extensions are valid extensions for programs we most commonly use, right? PDF, PowerShell, Excel, but attackers can embed these files with malicious code. An example would be Excel files or Word files, where they would use something called the malicious macros. Let's now take an example of how malware attacks occur. Specifically, we will take a look at how Excel files or Word files contain malicious code. So show desktop and go to the example. So in here we have a Word file, and this Word file, once you open the Word file, sometimes it shows a warning. The warning says macros have been disabled. Once you see this warning, it means that the Word file that you have just downloaded or you have just received from the sender contains macros. Now macros on their own are not actually used for bad intentions or bad purposes. Macros are actually featured in Word or Excel to automate repetitive tasks. Many people who work very frequently on Excel or Word, they use macros to automate certain tasks in the file. But again, malicious actors or attackers also use macros to embed malicious code. So once you see this warning, it means that this file uses macros. So what to do in this case? Should you go ahead and enable the content, or should you just ignore the warning and go ahead with the file? Now, the deciding factor is sender themselves. So you may go ahead and ask the sender if you recognize them, and ask them, did you enable macros in the Word file? And what was the purpose of enabling the macros? Do I need to enable the macros in order to view the file? Depending on the answer of the sender, you would go ahead and disable or enable the content. If you don't know the sender, if you have just downloaded the file from the internet and you don't know the source, it's better not to click on enable content unless you needed to do that. It's better also to upload the file to a malware scanner, just as VirusTotal, in order to clear the doubts. Okay, this is another example of malware attacks. It is the ransomware. So ransomware, as you know, the definition of ransomware: specialized class of malware used to infect as many systems as possible, encrypting the data on the devices. I'm sure you know what is ransomware, so let's skip this. Now, what's the protection from malware attacks? Well, This is very hard to answer, and it's very hard to achieve full immunity from malware attacks. But you can defend yourself from 95% of malware attacks by using two methods or two security measures. The first one is, as always, it is the security awareness. So let me here clear these guys and match the protections with the corresponding attack. So okay, so for social engineering, we saw that the defense strategy was security awareness. Let me draw one arrow like that. Now for malware attacks, the first one, we have Antivirus Solutions. So Antivirus Solutions would block 70% of the malware attacks. Now it's not actually or accurately 70%. It's only a subjective opinion. It's based on my own speculation. You can go on the internet and research how much percentage of malware attacks can antivirus solutions block. But I chose 70% because malware attacks these days are very modern. They use obfuscation, are encrypted, and they use advanced technology to evade antivirus solutions. So that's my opinion. But in general, antivirus solutions these days are modern. They use advanced technology such as behavior analysis, and they also rely on signature database. So the other 30% of malware attacks or malwares are actually hard to detect. They use obfuscation, easily evade antivirus solutions. So antivirus solutions aren't the only method to protect against malware attacks. The next one is security awareness. Why? Security awareness is actually very or tremendously helpful in blocking all kinds of cyber attacks, especially these attacks that require user interaction. So if a user is browsing on a site from an untrusted source and they download a file or a game or a program, the chances are they would infect themselves very high. So by security awareness training, we actually train users not to download attachments, not to download files from untrusted sources. So security awareness is actually very important, tremendously important in blocking malware attacks. And we have backups. So no matter what happens, if a malware attack hits your network, you can always restore from backups. So backups actually and arguably the most effective method. It is the most effective method against cyber attacks. No matter the kind of cyber attack that hits your network, you can always restore from backups. Okay, so make sure to have backups all the time according to the rule. The rule is 3, 2, 1. So 3 is having 3 up-to-date copies of backups. 2, having the backups distributed to 2 medias. Let's say 1 USB device and 1 HD device, and 1 here having 1 backup copy in the cloud. All right, so next one, authentication attacks. So right now we are here. Authentication attacks are these attacks that target usernames and passwords. An example would be brute force. So brute force attacks. Also phishing can be used. Yeah, I'm gonna call phishing now. Phishing is actually social engineering. Let me remove this one. So brute force attacks are authentication attacks that target SSH servers, login forms, right? Also authentication forms in websites. So what is actually brute force attack? Brute force attack is a type of attack that targets and aims to harvest usernames and passwords. So how it happens, let me now go to the simulation and show you how a brute force attack happens. So we open the simulation here, view site. All right, So this is one kind of authentication attacks. So here we have a password list. Let's grab the password list. So this is a password list. And once we click on go, what's going to happen here? The tool here will take a hash, will calculate the hashes of all of the passwords, right? And compare the hashes of these passwords with the actual hash. Once it finds a hash, it will just decrypt the hash and give you the password. So why all of that? So basically here, we got this hash, say from a password database that has been leaked, or from system database, let's say. So once we get the hash, this is the hash of an actual password, right? So in order to guess the password, we're gonna have to use a word list. In the word list here, we take a hash of every password and compare it to the target hash that we have just retrieved from either a password database leak or from a system we have just compromised. Once we find an actual match, we will convert the match back to the password and try it. So if you click on go here, as you can see, the password is saying, or the password has been found, TryHackMe 123 exclamation mark. And this is the password hash. That's how authentication attacks works. But of course, that's only a simulation. In real, what happens is someone would use tools such as Hydra or Perp Suite. If you don't know what are these tools, you can go to one of the videos on my channel and see how brute force attacks happen. So I'm gonna now minimize this and get back here. So what is the measure or security measure to prevent authentication attacks? So as always, we use, let me remove these first. I don't want to confuse you with too many drawings. So keep this. I'm gonna remove this one. These. Okay. For authentication attacks, first we use strong passwords, and if possible, we use multi-factor authentication. So what constitutes a strong password? There are many factors that go into forming a strong password. The first one is the length. Make sure the password is long enough. The recommendation is to go above 9 characters. The next recommendation is to use lowercase, uppercase, symbols, and digits. Where to put this? Oops. Digits. Also, there is another factor to form a strong password. It should be not predictable. Non-predictable. What do you mean by non-predictable? Let's take an example now of a password that is long, has lowercase, uppercase, symbol, and digits, but is predictable, which means the password is weak. For example, say the first letter of my name in uppercase, my birth year, okay, and let's say one exclamation mark, okay, and lastly I will use small letter M. And what else do I need to tell you about me? Let's say, yeah, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, so two more characters. Let's say cat. It's the animal I love. So right now we have more than 9 characters, we have digits, we have symbol, and we have upper and lowercase, but still the password is predictable. If someone knows a bit about me, and if they know what is my birth year, they know what is the first letter of my name, and they know that I love cats, they would be able to make a word list and guess this password. So the most important factor in constituting a strong password is the predictability. It shouldn't be predictable. That's why your password should actually be composed of arbitrary, let's say, compendium of characters. So could be M, could be exclamation mark, pound character, and 921, just arbitrary constitution of characters, and it should be long. That's how you form an unpredictable password. These passwords take long time to crack, and advanced technology, of course. So multi-factor authentication is a very effective method to prevent brute force attacks. So multi-factor authentication, it is a term used to describe any authentication process where you need more than one thing to log in. So you need the password, but you need additional thing to log in. So an example of multi-factor authentication is SMS messages that contain an authentication code sent by the provider. An example would be if you tried the Facebook multi-factor authentication, right? Once you log in, Facebook would send you an SMS message containing an authentication code, say 9761681. This is your authentication code. And in order to log in successfully, you're required to enter this code. This will prevent anyone from logging into your account if they happen to have the password. It's an effective method to prevent authentication attacks, even if someone has determined your password. All right, the last one is bug exploitation. Let's remove these first. So bug exploitation, I should have renamed this, by the way. It should be vulnerability exploitation. Vulnerability exploitation refers to the term when someone finds a bug in a program code. So there are various purposes of finding bugs in a program code. Some of them are for black hat purposes, and some of them are for white hat purposes. So you know something called the bug bounty. Someone would find a bug in a program code and report the bug to the developers and reward it with some cash. That's the white hat method. But the black hat method, when someone exploits a vulnerability in your software. Say you have a web server running Apache, right? And also running some, say, a program open to the internet. So this program is running on port 7961, and customers, you have customers here, okay? Customers remotely, they would use the internet to access this program and interact with it. Now, some attacker, if they find that your program is exposed to the internet, they would try to reveal the source code. Once they reveal the source code, they will look for bugs. If they find a bug, they will exploit the program and have access to your PC or to the server. That's how vulnerability exploitation works. They find a bug or a vulnerability in your program to be able to exploit or to compromise the full system. Now, vulnerabilities are published and recognized, published and stored in something called the vulnerability database. That was one example of exploiting a vulnerability by a black hat attacker. Now, most of the time when vulnerabilities are discovered, they are reported, stored, and maintained in the vulnerability database. So the National Vulnerability Database here maintains a list of all of the vulnerabilities that were reported to the public or discovered. And as you can see here, every vulnerability is coded this way: the CVE, and then the year of the published year, and lastly we have the ID of the vulnerability. That's how vulnerabilities are maintained and stored in the National Vulnerability Database. Some of these vulnerabilities have an exploit. You can find exploits. Most of the exploits are actually found in exploit database. You can take a look here. It contains active exploits for vulnerabilities, and some of them are actually maintained in GitHub. GitHub is an example where you could find exploits for vulnerabilities. As you can see, if you click on 2014, you have exploits for these CVEs. All right, so what's the security measure to prevent these kind of attacks? To prevent vulnerability exploitation or to implement a cyber defense strategy against vulnerability exploitation, we have to use patch management. The patch management program is a program where you update and upgrade your programs, especially those exposed to the public regularly. most patch management programs implement updates quarterly. Some of them implement updates monthly, right? Especially for programs exposed to the internet, such as Apache, if you have a web server, if you have SSH server, if you have a program, even a small program exposed to the internet for other people to use, you have to make sure that the program is updated regularly. So patch management protects against 90% of vulnerability exploitation, right? But it doesn't protect you against 10% of zero-day. So zero-day attacks are example of vulnerabilities where there is no patch or fix for them, of course, because they are new. An example of zero-day is Log4j. Log4j vulnerability. Now, Log4j vulnerability hits hundreds of thousands of Apache servers on the web. It was disastrous. At the time of publishing or discovering the Log4j, there was no active patch or fix for it. That's why it's called zero-day. And there is no way to protect yourself against zero-day attacks. The only method to protect yourself against zero-day attacks is to shut down the service or the vulnerable service until a patch is produced. So that was for today. I hope you guys found that informative, and we will see you in the next video.